Hello and welcome to part 2 of my video on how to prepare for the US F1 student visa interview and how to face the interview with confidence. Now, if you haven't watched the first part of this video, then I would strongly recommend that you watch the first part and then watch this video. The link to the first part is mentioned in the description of this video. In this video, I'll talk about what questions a visa officer could typically ask you pertaining to your finances. That is, on how do you plan to pay for your education and how do you go about answering these questions. Now, before I get into the details of what questions a visa officer could ask you pertaining to your finances, let me clarify that the US visa is not an accounting exercise. That is, it is not that if you show a certain amount of funds, you will get the visa, and if you show anything less, you will not get the visa. That is not how the visa officers are going to assess your financial capabilities. In fact, the visa officer will not even get into the details of your finances. That is, they will not be checking your bank statements or maybe your fixed deposits or any other financial proofs that you carry during your visa. What the visa officer is going to do is only do a broad assessment of your finances, and if they are convinced that you have the capability to pay for your education, they would grant you the visa. Like, I have heard a lot of students saying that you have to demonstrate at least 1.5 times of the I-20 amount or 2 times of the I-20 amount to get the visa. None of it is true. As I said earlier, the visa officer is not going to get into the details. That is, they are not going to check, okay, 2 times the I-20 is this much and the funds available with the students are so and so. And if the later is greater than the former, that is, the student has funds more than twice the I-20, then I'll grant the visa. And if there is anything less, I'll not grant the visa. The visa officer is only going to ask you questions about your broad source of funds. And if they are convinced that yes, the student has the capability to pay, they would grant you the visa. So don't get too much bogged down by doing this kind of calculations that, okay, I have so much funds, the I-20 cost is so and so. In the later part of the video, I'll discuss what questions the visa officer is going to ask you and how they are going to make an assessment in your case. So what questions would a visa officer generally ask you to assess your financial capabilities? Generally, the first question that the visa officer asks you pertaining to your finances would be, how do you plan to pay for your education? Or who is going to pay for your education? Now, in this case, what you will have to tell the visa officer is what is going to be the source of your funds. And I would not recommend at this point getting into the details of it. Like, for instance, you could say, like, my father is going to pay for my education, or you could say that my father and my mother, that is, my parents, are going to pay for my education, and I have also availed an education loan. Or if you have only availed an education loan and the entire education is going to be paid through an education loan, you can say that I have availed an education loan and that is how I'll be going to pay for my education. Don't get into the details of how much money does your father have, or how much money does your mother have, or how much money is there in your bank account, or how much is the loan for, and all those details. You could just give a short answer saying that my parents are going to pay for my education and I have also availed an education loan, and that is what is going to cover the cost of my education. If whatever is your major source of funds, mention that first. For example, if your cost of education is estimated, say, at 50 lakhs, and out of which 40 lakhs is going to come from an education loan, then talk about the education loan first. You could say, I have taken an education loan, and if additional funds are required, my parents are also willing to pay for it. But in case your parents are going to be the major contributors and you have only a small portion that you think would be coming from an education loan, then talk about the parents first. Say that my parents are going to pay for my education and I have also availed an education loan. So, whatever is your primary source, mention that first without getting into the details of how much money is available with each source. Right? Don't have to get into the details of, okay, my father has 40 lakhs and my mother has 20 lakhs and I have an education loan of 20 lakhs. Those kind of details. Now, once you mention the source of your funds, for example, you say that my father is going to pay for my education, a follow-up question that a visa officer would generally ask you is, what does your father do and what is his annual income? Now, at that point, definitely mention what your father's designation or job role, or maybe if he's in business or any kind of other profession, mention his profession. and talk about his annual income. Mention all amounts in Indian rupees, unless of course your father is earning in a different currency, that is your father is not earning in Indian rupees but earning in a different currency because, say for example, he's living abroad or working abroad, you could mention that. And generally you might find that after you mention your father's designation and income, that is your sponsor's designation and income, if the amount that your sponsor is earning is sufficient enough, the interview might just end there. I mean, the visa officer would just make the visa decision at that moment. Sometimes the visa officer would want to get into the details of the funds available with your sponsor, and they could ask you how much funds are available with your father. I mean, assuming that your father is your sponsor. So at that moment, say for example, you have around 10 lakhs in savings, 20 lakhs in fixed deposits, maybe 30 lakhs invested in mutual funds and stocks, and your father has a PF amount of another 40 lakhs. So at that moment, you need not get into the details of these. You could say that my father has investments of around 60 lakhs, which I would be using for my education. Additionally, he has another 40 lakhs in his retirement funds, which would be available to him once he retires. So you could give a very broad answer even at that point without going into the details of 10 lakhs are in savings, 20 lakhs are in FDs, maybe another 40 lakhs in shares and mutual funds, kind of an answer. Okay. So whenever the visa officer asks you a question, try to keep your answers simple. I mean, don't try to confuse and complicate things by getting into too many details. So try to understand what the question is and try to give a very simple answer. In case the visa officer wants to get into further details, like, okay, you say there are 60 lakhs available with you, where are these funds available? Then you can get into the bifurcation part. But in the very beginning, that is right from, sometimes students make the mistake that they get into the bifurcation or very early in the visa discussion. That is, when the visa officer asks, how do you plan to pay for your education? They start off with the bifurcation. That is, they say, I have 10 lakhs in savings, I have 20 lakhs in fixed deposits, I have 40 lakhs in mutual funds, and so on. But rather than getting into those kind of details at a very early stage, only when asked, if the visa officer asks you about the bifurcation or the split up of your funds, then get into the details of it. Again, you need not remember the amounts to the nearest rupee. I mean, if the amount in the bank is say 10 lakhs 23,243, you don't have to remember that. Just remembering to the nearest lakh is good enough. Like you could say there is 10 lakhs or 11 lakhs in the bank account, that is in savings account, approximately 20 lakhs in fixed deposits, approximately another 30 lakhs in mutual funds, and so on, or whatever is your case. If you say that you are going to pay through an education loan, the visa officer could then sometimes ask you details about your education loan. That is, where is the education loan from, how much is the loan amount, and so on. Most of the questions related to finances are very straightforward. That is, you don't have to really think of what answers to give them. Whatever is your actual situation, you will have to tell the visa officer. Now, here are some very important points pertaining to your finances that you should be aware of before you attend your visa interview. The first one is that you should have absolute clarity in terms of your finances. Often I have seen that students have no interest in knowing the finances and they do not have a very good understanding of what are the various kind of investments their parents have. Like for example, they do not understand the difference between fixed deposits, recurring deposits, saving accounts. They are clueless about mutual fund investments, equity investments, what is a PPF account or a PF account, and all that. So when you attend an interview, if you are not very clear on where the funds are and how your funds distribution is, you will not be able to explain it to the visa officer in case questions are asked. As I said, visa officers are not going to check your documents. That is, they are not going to tell you, okay, give me your documents, let me go through them and I'll then figure it out. They are not even going to let you refer to those documents. So they would only ask you question and expect an answer. And that is why sit with your parents or whoever is your sponsor and understand what the funding situation is. Only once you are clear on how the funds are bifurcated and distributed, you will be able to explain it to the visa officer in case they ask you something about it. Now, another thing that you should be absolutely clear about is what is going to be the actual cost of your education. And I've often seen that students are really confused about this part. What students generally do is that they take the I-20 amount and multiply that by 2 and assume that that is going to be the cost of your education. That is in case you're going for a master's degree. But in many cases, that may not be true. Like, take for example, a case of a student who is going to the engineering program, that is Masters in Engineering program at Arizona State University. Now, if you look at the I-20 of Arizona State University, it says that the cost of tuition for 1 year is almost $40,000. The cost of living and other books and supplies approximately comes to around $19,000. So the total cost of education at Arizona for 1 year is estimated at $59,000. Now, if you double that amount, it comes to almost $120,000, which means that someone studying a master's degree at Arizona would eventually spend 1 crore of rupees on their education. But that is not the case, because when Arizona State University does the calculation for 1 year of tuition, they assume that in 1 year a student would take 24 credits. But most master's degrees at Arizona are around 30 to 33 credits. So although the tuition for 1 year is going to be $40,000, that is, the tuition for 24 credits is actually going to be $40,000. The tuition for 30 credits is going to come to somewhere around $50,000 and not $80,000 in case you double and calculate the cost, because then that would show the cost of 48 credits, whereas your degree is only 30 credits. So in most cases, the master's degree tuition at ASU would come to somewhere around $50,000. You can assume on a higher side that the total living expenses at ASU would be another $20,000. So the total cost on the higher side would be around $70,000 for the entire master's program. Now, this is what is the actual cost that the student would incur at ASU. $70,000 would come to approximately 60 lakhs or a little less. And so if a student has funds of around 60 to 65 lakhs, that is going to be sufficient to cover the entire cost of education and living at Arizona, assuming that the student has no student jobs or does not get any internships or anything in the worst case scenario. Now let's assume that the student appears for a visa interview and the student has funding of, say, an education loan of 50 lakhs and maybe his parents have another 15 lakhs to pay for his education. Now, in case the visa officer looks at the I-20 and says that, okay, I see here that the cost of 1 year is $59,000. So I assume that the cost of the entire program is $120,000, which is close to 1 crore. But you are telling me that you have only 65 lakhs of funds available with you. How would you manage your educational cost? Now, at that point, if you cannot explain the things to the visa officer, that is, you cannot explain the calculation of your actual tuition and your living cost to the visa officer, and you start getting confused because you accept whatever the visa officer is saying and just give vague answers that I'll still be able to manage, my parents can raise more money and all that. That would cause a lot of problems for you during the visa interview. So the point is, you should be very thorough. You will have to tell the visa officer, no sir or no ma'am, this is not the case. The I-20 amount that has been calculated is calculated for 24 credits, whereas my program is only 30 credits. So you cannot double the cost to calculate my tuition. My tuition would only come to around $50,000 and not $80,000 that you get by doubling the I-20 amount. Also, I have spoken with a lot of students at Arizona State University, and I would be actually using a shared accommodation. So my cost of living would also not be close to $40,000, which you would get by doubling the I-20, but by spending around $20,000 to $25,000, I should be able to sufficiently live and spend on my living. So the 65 lakhs that I have are more than sufficient to cover my complete educational cost at ASU. So unless you are able to explain this to the visa officer, you will not be able to clear the visa interview. So the point is, you will be able to explain this only if you have absolute clarity about your cost. So it is my very strong recommendation that you should have absolute clarity about the actual cost that you will be incurring towards your education. This is important not just for the sake of your visa, but also for your own financial planning. And once you have this information, once you have good clarity in terms of how much is going to be your cost of education, how much is going to be your cost of living, the actual cost, you will be able to face your visa interview with a lot of confidence. Now, there is a misconception among students that telling the visa officer that a major part of your funding or your entire funding for your education is going to be paid through an education loan will only increase the chances of your visa rejection. Now, this is absolutely not true. In fact, telling the visa officer that you have availed an education loan can only help you strengthen your application. Now, students often argue that if I tell the visa officer that I have availed an education loan, the visa officer would think that this student would definitely try to work in the US to pay off the education loans. Now, first of all, it is not that just because you have availed an education loan, you will try to find a job in the US, and students who have not availed an education loan will not try to find a job in the US. That is definitely not going to be the case. Whether you have spent your parents' money or you have paid through an education loan, it is very likely that you will try to find a job in the US because that is going to help you gain relevant experience and, of course, make some money as well. And visa officers know that. The second important point is that working in the US is not illegal. I mean, on your student visa, you have a provision known as the OPT which allows you to do that. And as I mentioned in my earlier video, you are definitely allowed to do that provided that gives you relevant work experience. Visa officers are also aware of that. Now, visa officers are not really concerned on how you pay off your education loans, whether you find a job in the US or you come back to India, work and pay off that education loan, or someone else helps you pay off that education loans. That is not their lookout. What a visa officer is concerned is what are your sources of funds and how reliable are your sources of funds. What they want to ensure is that you don't run out of money midway through your education. And that is why they ask you questions about your funding, on who is going to pay for your education and so on. Now, the most reliable sources are education loans, and the second one I would say are parents, because there is a very high possibility that a parents, if they have the funds, would not refuse you funds midway through your education. And so is the case with a bank or any financial institution that has sanctioned an education loan for you. They will definitely not refuse you funds midway through your education. How they recover that loan post your education is between you and the bank or the financial institution from which you have availed the loan. That, as I said, is not the visa officer's lookout. What the visa officer is only concerned is whether this person has a very reliable source of funds. Now, a common mistake that students make is that because they try to hide the fact that they have availed an education loan, and if their parents' financial conditions are not really that strong, then they try to bring in an additional sponsor who could be an uncle or an aunt or maybe some other friend, and tell the visa officer that my uncle or aunt or my friend is going to pay for my education. Now, what the visa officers don't understand is why would this person pay for your education? And they feel that an uncle or aunt, although they have the funds, is not a very reliable source of funds because there is a very high possibility that this person might refuse you funds both maybe after you go to the US or maybe somewhere midway through the education. And if that happens, you then run out of funds and you cannot complete your education, and then your status in the US becomes illegal. That is what the visa officers are trying to avoid. That is, they want to ensure that the candidate, that is the student, has a very reliable source of funds to pay for his or her education, and that is where an education loan becomes a very strong source of funds. So even if 100% of your funding is going to come from an education loan, tell that to the visa officer. That is not going to make your case weak. In fact, that will only help you strengthen your application. Now, adding to my earlier point, if your parents are really not financially capable of paying for your education, I would strongly recommend that you avail an education loan rather than adding an uncle or some member of your extended family as your sponsor. Visa officers find it really difficult to comprehend the fact that why would an uncle or aunt or some other person in the family pay for your education. that is also not a cultural thing in the US. So they find it a little difficult to understand and believe that this person would pay for your education. But in a scenario that you really have to tell that yes, my uncle is going to pay for my education or my aunt is going to pay for my education, tell the visa officer that you are only borrowing this money as a loan from your uncle and aunt temporarily, because at this moment your parents don't have the financial liquidity to pay for your education, but very soon your parents would be repaying your uncle or aunt, and you would also make an attempt to repay your uncle or aunt when you eventually start working and start earning. So don't just say that they are going to give this money to you as a gift, or don't make it sound as if they are just going to give this money for your education as a gift. Now, I have often seen students telling visa officers that my uncle is going to pay for my education or my aunt is going to pay for my education because they love me a lot. I have been very close to them since childhood. We are a very close knit family, and so on. But it still becomes a little difficult to convince the visa officer that an uncle or aunt would actually pay for your education. I would strongly recommend that you try availing an education loan. And I have also seen that students sometimes bring in the uncle or aunt when they are actually not going to pay for the education. They only try to tell the visa officer because they feel that their parents have weak financial assets. That is, their financial health of your parents are weak, or sometimes they don't have the required paperwork that the visa officer might ask, and that's the reason why they say that my parents are not going to pay for my education, because if the visa officer asks you for documents, you don't have the documents to prove that your parents have the kind of network to pay for your education. And that's why they bring in the uncle or aunt. Now, this is a big mistake that you can make during your visa. Visa officers are, as I said earlier, are not accountants. They are not going to, look at balance sheets or income statements or even tax records and then determine whether or not your parents are financially capable of paying for your education. If your parents are actually going to pay for your education, just tell the visa officer that my parents are going to pay for your education. Don't make the mistake of bringing in an uncle or aunt when they are actually not going to pay for your education. As I said earlier, the visa is not an accounting exercise, and you definitely need to get out of this whole accounting mindset when you appear for the visa interview. What I mean by this is that, say for example, there are 15 lakhs of rupees in your dad's account, 10 lakhs in your mom's account, 5 lakhs in your account, and between the family you have equities and mutual fund investments of another 40 lakhs, and the total comes to around 70 lakhs. Now, if the visa officer asks you how much funds are available with your dad, you don't have to exactly give the amount in your dad's name. So you just tell the visa officer that totally we have around 70 lakhs, or even if you say that 70 lakhs are available with my dad, that is also absolutely fine. You don't have to go and in your mind, do the calculation that maybe 5 lakhs of equities are in my dad's name and 15 lakhs, so I'll just say 20 lakhs. No, that is what an accountant would do, but this is not what you are supposed to do. You have to tell the visa officer what is the funds available in totality or with the family as such. They might use the term dad, but they don't exactly mean that. Again, they are also not coming from that accounting mindset where they are asking how much is with your dad's name, how much is with your mom's name, how much is in your name. When they ask the question, sometimes how much is available with your dad or how much is available with your parents or family, they mean the same thing. So that is something that you have to understand. When you talk about the funds, talk about the funds that are available with the family as a whole, and not just because the visa officer asks you a question how much is available with your mom or how much is available with your dad, give exactly the amounts of bifurcation that is available with dad and mom. Also, when it comes to your parents' income, I have seen cases where the actual income is much higher than what has been represented on the tax returns. Now, I'll not get into the details of why that happens and how that happens, but if that is the case with you as well, and the visa officer asks you about your dad's or your mom's or your family income, tell them what the actual amounts are. Again, this is not an accounting exercise, and visa officers are not tax auditors. You can always explain, if you have to, what exactly is the reason for the actual income to be much higher Then what has been represented on the tax record, that is in case the visa officer gets into the details of your tax records and all those things. Most likely they will not. But even if it has to, you can definitely admit that the actual income is much higher than the income that has been represented on your tax records. And that is okay to do that. Don't worry about it. You are not talking to an accountant or a tax auditor. You are talking to a visa officer. So be honest about everything is what I would say. Well, students ask, what financial documents should you carry to your visa interview? As mentioned earlier, financial documents are not going to be scrutinized, but if you still have to carry them, carry whatever proofs you have for your finances. If you have money in savings account, carry bank statements. You can carry passbooks. If your money is in fixed deposits, you could carry online printouts of your fixed deposits. If you have the actual fixed deposit receipts, you can carry those. If your money is in mutual funds or any other investments, you could just print statements of your mutual funds or equities, and that is all that is required. You don't need to get any extra letters or any letters issued by banks or any of your depositories or anybody just for the sake of visa. Whatever proofs you have, even if it is a print of an online statement, that is also absolutely accepted. Again, there is no rule that the printout, the statement should be 6 months old, or they should be printed just 1 or 2 days before the visa. They can be printed 1 week before the visa, that is fine. You can carry only 1 month bank statement, that is also absolutely fine. Again, there are no rules on what you need to carry and what is accepted and what is not accepted. What is definitely not accepted and not required are CA valuations. That is, you don't need to get CA statements giving an list of your assets and investments and all that. What is again not required are property valuations. So you don't have to get your properties valuated or get those. In case you're taking a loan and your bank needs that, that's a different thing. That is between you and the bank. But as far as the visa is concerned, you don't need to carry any of those documents. So property documents of any form is not required. You don't need CA statements, as I said earlier. You don't need letters issued by the bank specifically for the sake of the visa. Like you might have got the letters issued by the bank for getting your I-20, but for the visa, you don't need any of those letters. Just take online prints of your bank statements. These documents again need not be certified by anybody. That is, you just do a print of your bank statement from your online account, and that bank statement need not be certified or stamped by the bank. Similarly, other investments that you have, maybe your PPF or maybe mutual funds, or your investments in post office, whatever you think you have and you need to carry, you can carry. No document needs to be certified. You don't need to carry photocopies of any documents. So, like for example, if you have a fixed deposit that has been a receipt that has been issued by the bank in original, you carry the original. You don't have to carry a photocopy of it along with the original. In case you don't want to carry the original, you might just carry because you think you have the risk of misplacing it, just carry a photocopy. That is also absolutely fine. So you can carry either online prints, or you can carry photocopies, or if you have the originals, you can carry originals, but don't carry the originals and an extra set of photocopies. Even if the visa officer checks that, they will not keep any copies with them. They will check your documents. That's like a 0.02% that they might do that. But let's assume that that's the case and you happen to be the person whose documents the visa officer asked, right? So in case they do that, they will only check, verify, and return you all the documents right at that moment. So don't carry too many extra documents. Even if you don't carry any documents, that is also absolutely fine. And before I conclude this video, there is something really important that I would like to tell you, and that is, in any visa interview, the first few set of questions are going to revolve around why this university, why this program, and about your profile. Visa officers are trying to assess your preparedness towards this program, and they want to know your thought process on why you chose this program. And those questions are the most important ones. Sometimes the visa officer may not even ask you any questions related to your finances and would make a decision based on your initial questions only. Even if the visa officer asks you questions about the finances, the initial questions are the ones that actually drive the visa officer's decisions. But it often happens that in case where a student's visa gets rejected, because the last few set of questions are about the finances, students feel that maybe because I didn't answer the questions about the finances properly, my visa was rejected. But that is often not the case. It is because you probably didn't answer the initial questions properly. That is the reason why your visa is being rejected. Rather than it is not the later questions, that is the last question is not the one that is actually making the visa officer decide on rejecting your visa. So focus more on the initial set of questions that a visa officer could ask you, the ones that I have discussed in part 1 of the video. Your answers to those questions are going to have a major influence on the visa officer's decision. Questions about the finances are sometimes just asked for the sake of formality, and sometimes the visa officer may not even ask you these questions. With this, I'll conclude this video, and if you have any questions, and I'm sure you will, feel free to post them as comments in the video and I'll try my best to answer them. In another video, I'll answer some of the questions that I might have missed in this and my earlier video on visa interviews, and also some of the frequently asked questions about the visa interview. I hope you find my videos useful and I hope you enjoyed watching them. Once again, thank you for watching.